मानुषी के मित्रों को मेरा नमस्कार. Friends, today we are going to talk to Abhijit Iyer Mitra on a very vital subject, namely the preparedness of the Indian Army in dealing with all the enemies that surround us, and in particular the challenges faced by our Jawans in dealing with high-tech warfare that has taken over the world, for which India seems ill-prepared. And this is a subject Abhijit has worked in depth on. Abhijit, the reason I invited you for this conversation is because last time when we met over dinner, you made a chance comment about how undernourished the Indian Jawan is and how that is a major security risk for us. Now, it left me deeply disturbed because it also brought back memories of one Tej Bahadur Yadav, a Jawan, who had posted a video of the very substandard food that he alleged was being served to the Jawans. And instead of remedying the situation, the man was fired, and I am told he came to a tragic end. The media just went silent on it. Now, did you mean it seriously? What standards were you judging this issue of nutrition of the Indian Army soldiers and officers?
So, the thing that set me onto this whole thing of looking at soldier welfare holistically was my trip to North Korea. Where I, after paying my respects at the tomb of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un, or Kim Jong-il, I think, I forget, they all sound the same, I saw what I thought was a delegation of midgets. And it turned out they weren't midgets at all. They were victims of the successive waves of famine that had hit North Korea, and in particular this delegation was from Hamgyong province that was targeted. It wasn't a famine that happened, it was a famine that was done deliberately to punish them. And what that had resulted in is that people born during the famine had become severely stunted, 4 feet 8 inches, 4 feet 9 inches, maximum going up to about 5 feet 1 or 2 inches at most. And it's one thing looking at the oddity once every now and then. This was a whole delegation of a few hundred of them that were around the same height.
You mean a battalion?
Almost a battalion. I mean, they were all civilians marching in because they're over weekends they meant to come pay respects to some leader or the other. And that got me thinking. And normally you ignore these things. And that got me thinking to, when we go to a Delhi construction site, if you notice all the laborers out there, they're a good foot shorter
than the middle class,
exactly,
male and female.
Right. And that's when it struck me what the hell was happening. So then I started researching about it, and it turns out that 45% of India is malnourished, 33% is stunted. Right, 33% of this country is stunted. And we don't even think about it. You don't hear about it. Nobody makes a scandal about it in the press.
No, once in a while UNICEF will raise this issue.
No, but see,
I'm saying for
this
children,
is a
for kids, and then you have these ads.
See, no, that is irrelevant.
Yeah,
see, that is just a fundraising this thing.
Yeah.
If 1/3 of your population is stunted, you have a serious health problem. It's a health
national
crisis.
emergency.
Exactly.
No less.
And they're not doing anything about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to acknowledge it. Anyway, now what happens in all of this is, remember, it is your blue collar laborers, it is your underprivileged people who form the bulk of the recruitment into the non-officer cadre of your armed forces. So your intake itself, 1/3 of your pool, your intake pool is stunted. Then what happens is, understand, if stunting happens in the family, it reduces the cognitive ability, because that is how the human body copes with the lack of nourishment, and it lasts for 3 generations. So it's going to take you 3 generations at least to come out of that problem. And this is also a cognitive, a mental cognitive this thing. This is the pool of intake into the military that you're going into, right?
No, but it could well be argued that these very poor, very stunted groups or communities are not the ones from where recruitment is taking place. That those who go for the recruitment are Jats and Gujars and Rajputs.
So no, so see, here's the thing, you have regionalized recruitment everywhere, right? And there are minimum height requirements. So you're also discriminating against these people who've already been stunted.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a different matter. Now, this is your pool, right? Second, what happens is once you get into the military, you suffer from several other cognitive problems and nourishment problems. The first one is that, modern technology in the West, where you have an average household. So when I say the Westosphere, I mean Japan, Australia, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, the Western alliance system, the American alliance system, NATO, Europe, North America. Some of them are NATO, some of them are not, but they're all tied into some kind of commercial or military alliance with America. They have a disposable income of about $40,000. They can afford to give their kids PlayStations and Xboxes and things like that. And invariably you find that military technology, especially for the soldier and things like that, is taking on from there. So as a kid, you have this automatic, your brain is programmed to deal with this, with these kind of video games, which then becomes a very easy transition into technology, into military technology, number one. Number two, what happens with this is that you're also, in all these role-playing and combat games, you're given a great deal of leeway to do what you want. You're allowed to take decisions on your own. So it's a mental training device in several ways. You're neuro-linguistically training the soldier. You're also incentivizing the soldier to take decisions, strategize and things.
From kids to soldier.
No, I'm not. Let me finish.
Sorry.
This is number two. And the third thing in all of this is, you're looking at fundamental nourishment problems already at the starting point, which aren't even related to stunting. Because remember, 33% is the overlay on top of the 45%, within the 45%. So you still have people who are outwardly normal looking, who are technically malnourished, joining the forces. So what are the three things for these boys joining the forces right now? One is they will probably be given technology that will take them a very, very long time to get adjusted to. Two, they are been given technology that is meant to enable the soldier, which they have not been trained because of their schooling is all rote, learn by rote, it's not decision taking. And third, you're coming with a malnourishment problem which has all kinds of effects. Now, once they get into the army, what happens to all of this? First, we don't acknowledge, cognitive problems and things like that. That holistic looking after a soldier, creating that bridge, we do cut and paste. The West is doing this, France is doing this, America is doing this, therefore this is good, let's bring this in here. Is it suitable to our soldier? You don't think about. So they're just thrown in at the deep end, number one. Number two, what happens is that in terms of, the decision making, in India, we look at technology to extend the control of the generals. In the West, technology is used to enable the soldier to think for himself and act for himself, right? And the third thing that happens is the nourishment problem becomes worse because we look at nourishment as the sum total of calories. We've still got that 1910, 1920s mindset, hatta gatta hai to healthy hai, which is not the case, Feeding somebody lots of ghee and oil and empty calories is not actually good for the soldier, right? You need an extremely healthy, balanced diet. You don't get all of that. So what happens is they're stuck in this horrible place where there's a technology mismatch, where there's a dietary mismatch, and where there's a decision-making mismatch. And the net result is you're essentially setting them up for getting scapegoated because you don't have standards and procedures listed out. So anytime something happens, they can just scapegoat one of the soldiers and say the soldier was at fault, the commanding officer wasn't at fault, or the higher commanding officer will scapegoat the lower commanding officer. and things like that. Now, an army is most effective A, when its training is good, B, when technology is not used to control it but rather to enable it, C, when you're holistically looked after nourishment and things like that, because that helps in things like basic health. You may have too many calories to burn, but you may not, it may cause gastrointestinal damage and things like that, or reduce your gastrointestinal health. And fourth, most importantly, the law and order setup. Now mind you, all of this is not looking at the micro, it's the macro is you're not looking at standards and procedures. So when you take action, you don't know. A Western soldier, for example, because he knows there's a strict standards and procedures that he's been trained into, if he shoots this guy, no court of inquiry is going to hold him guilty because he has followed all the standards and procedures. Here, standards and procedures are a joke. Right.
If anything, they go against the
If
ability
they go against, exactly,
of the Jawan to take action,
So this-
as happened with
so
this
this- yeah.
recent China
So the
incursion.
soldier is, look how badly they're treated effectively. They have no backup, they have no legal backup, they have no systemic backup. Their training is inadequate, at least to the tools of warfare. And here's the scary part of it. If you modernize the infantry more in terms of electronic equipment and things, that gap becomes harder to overcome.
May I intervene for just a second? Several years ago, a friend of mine in the army, a senior officer, told me that the cognitive abilities are so limited of the new recruits, especially those coming from remote villages, is that even for the parade, instead of left right, they do घास पत्ती.
हाँ.
एक पाँव पे घास, एक पे पत्ती. So घास पत्ती, because he gets confused if they say left right. Is that right?
That is absolutely right, because if you actually check out the news, this has happened some 2-3 times now, that the IQ requirement in the entrance exam has been reduced several times now.
Ooh.
So we're actually reducing the IQ requirements to meet the intake quotas.
And you need higher IQ today.
And here's
With
the problem,
technological
they're
warfare.
not even looking at why is that IQ reducing. Of course, nutrition and nourishment, the problem that we spoke about, is one of the problems. The second problem is the way our education itself is structured. Right, so for example, Shuddh Hindi and spoken Hindi are two completely different languages. I can tell you Chase Tamil, I don't understand a word of. I speak street Tamil and Brahmana Tamil, which are again two quite different languages. But then when you go into Chase Tamil, for me, it's almost like speaking Telugu. I don't understand a single word of it. I'll just be, it's completely foreign to me, right? Now, you're taking somebody who already has a nourishment and cognitive issue, and you're forcing this kind of horrendous education system that is forcing you to learn language by rote, which you don't understand because it isn't your native language. Now, people are against English because they say you can't learn anything in a foreign language. Well, you're teaching people a foreign language, because the chaste version of even the vernacular in this case is a completely different language.
That apart, survey after survey has shown that even teachers who are supposed to teach class 12 kids flunk the exam meant for class 5. Yeah. So, you're dealing with intellectual cerebral deficiency which is of epic proportions. Right. It isn't just about language. In any language, I'm talking about a Bihar teacher in the language of that region flunking the exam meant for class 6 while he's supposed to teach class 12. These are the kind of horrific facts coming to light day in and day out. Now, I want to take you back to the comment you made about nutritional deficiency that night. So, one part is that they come from impoverished families where the intake already is insufficient, especially considering that traditional diets and grains like ragi and nutritious foods that were part of our traditional diet have been replaced by maide ki bread and white chawal and processed food and chips. You will find chips even in the poorest of villages, but wholesome grains are now a fashion statement for the elite. So, A, that part. Secondly, what you described that night was the kind of food these people are giving, or the kind of food that Tej Bahadur Yadav had showed us on video. Was that genuine? Is
Right.
that close to reality?
Right. So,
Even the army not making up for it sufficiently.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
so here's the thing. There's two parts to this. The first one, of course, is that the Indian diet in the last 20 years has gone for a full toss. Okay, there is no more nutrition value left in Indian food. Even ghar ka khana no longer has that nutrition value left, because everybody wants to use onion, tomato, ginger, garlic and everything. Vegetables are overcooked. There is no nutrition left in them. The fiber is removed because kids don't want to eat fruits. They're given juice instead. Parents somehow seem to think Tetra Pak juice is a substitute for real
Which is
juice.
poison.
Which is poison. So on and so forth. And there's a roaring industry here where people put organic or natural and healthy or something like that, and people think that is actually
But the
natural
poor
and
are not
healthy.
even drinking Tetra Pak juices. They're drinking Pepsi, if at all.
Exactly.
As a treat.
So, this is one of those things that this is those, it's that peculiar, conspicuous commodities which the poor aspire to have as a luxury, which are not actually good for them. Right. So, anyway, that's a separate topic. But then you come even to the diet. On one hand, we have the kind of pilferage like we saw in that Tej Bahadur Yadav's video. Now, he got sacked for violating duty rules, and the inquiry found that in fact wasn't the food. They never said that the video was false.
Yeah.
They said he was he was sacked for spreading
no,
false.
they said he had discipline problems.
Correct.
The latest reports that announced his dismissal from service said he had discipline problems.
Yes, which I have no doubt in believing. But let's get back to the video that he showed. All right. And this is problematic because we know that there is rampant corruption in the logistics
of
levels
rations.
and things like that across the board in the military and across all the security services. This happens, we know it. And this notion that somehow the military or the judiciary is the lotus blooming in the pond of muck is complete rubbish, because military, judiciary, any institution is always a reflection of that society as a whole. If the society as a whole is corrupt and prone to corruption, these institutions will equally be prone to corruption. Now, this is number one. Nobody's actually disputed the fact that that video specifically was fake. The dal with just haldi in it, the fiki rotis and
Not
whatever
just haldi,
it
it was watery.
Yeah.
There was so little dal in
There's
it.
nothing in it. So that.
And burnt
On the other
rotis.
hand, if you go to say an officer's mess and things like that, the nutrition is zero. Because everything is cream, onion, too much butter, too much
It's like dhaba
fat.
food.
It's like dhaba food.
Same gravy for overcooked
What
food.
nutrition are you getting? This is again that 1910, 1920s mindset. जितना मोटा होगा, जितना घी तेल खाएगा, उतना बेहतर है. Right? There is not one thing. You show me an officer's menu today where you can say this is in any form or way healthy for them. It just meets a calorie count, that an officer needs 3000 calories a day, therefore he must get 3000 calories a day. You actually look at the vitamin breakup, the nutrition breakup. Is it being delivered in the right form? Because if you overcook certain things, then that nutrition value is lost. None of it is there.
At best, they have this twice a week chicken, twice a week eggs or some,
So that's
those
ticking
are
off.
ticking
It's a ticking off. It's not an
how you
application
cook
of mind.
them,
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
makes all the difference.
And you look at the military recipes. Very frequently what happens is these commandants, when they do puff pieces on them, they show that their chef has these fantastic recipes. He's the officer's mess chef with these amazing recipes, and you're looking at it and going, dude, this isn't good for you. You know that, right? If you're serving this twice a week, there's something very seriously wrong, because there's no nourishment or nutrition going into the officer based on this crap.
Last time you also described in graphic detail the difference between traditional cooking, which preserved nutrients, and even cooking dal the modern way. Why didn't you talk about that? Because at least the people, even during colonial era, when India was already impoverished, stunted, all that, but the health crisis was not as severe, at least in non-famine regions,
Right.
as it is today.
Right.
So discuss that.
So, there, even if you weren't in a famine region, you had to cook on a wooden flame or a cow dung flame, and the amount of fuel you had was limited, right? You have only so many cakes or so many bricks of blocks of wood, and this is, you have to sab khana isi mein pak jana chahiye. Now, the problem is you've got gas on tap. So, this is where modernity meets tradition and modernity destroys tradition. So, before, what used to happen was the primary thing was the rice or whatever that would be cooked, and then on succeeding pots the vegetable would be cooked, 2-3 vegetables.
They would
And
place
then
it over the steam.
over the steam of the rice, and then you could only do a tadka or a quick stir fry based on the embers of it. Or if it if it was roti and things like that, you would prioritize the roti quickly, and the potatoes would be cooked either in the flame or something like that, or it will be just a quick thing. The nourishment wasn't lost. This is why slow cooking was deemed a luxury. It could only be done in royal palaces and things like that, where you had to stew meat for 3-4 hours, which would then require several logs of wood and so on and so forth. Today, people are cooking vegetables for hours on end.
Also, the whole grains are
The whole grains, all our traditional grains are lost. Forget the whole grains. I mean, whole grains though is a completely different ball game. Atta has taken over completely from, maida has taken over completely from atta, and that too bleached. So God knows what else you're having on top of that. But then, see, our diversity of grains has been lost. Even our rice, our crop diversity of rice has been lost. The heritage rice, they all got sent off to Manila and destroyed at the Rice Research Institute in Manila. Nehru had them sent off there, and they were all destroyed. So our, our protection, our food security has gone for a full toss. People don't even want to discuss the fact that the Green Revolution was actually the cancer revolution. True. Right? Wherever the Green Revolution happened in Punjab is now the cancer belt in Punjab. And what you did was, in the interests of short-term famine relief, you gambled away the long-term food security, the crop diversity of your country.
And also, it's the way it's turned into flour. It's no more that chakki ka atta. Everything is rice today is just a bit of starch.
Right.
Without the white rice.
Right. So I've got these people where I only buy heritage rice from now, where it goes through a very strict control process. It's only hand polished and things like that. There's no chemicals used. It's all processed in the traditional way and things. But tell me, how many people can afford that?
The army should be they could well be reviving those traditional nutritious grains, dals, foods.
Look, I mean, it's not,
they could do
to
it.
be fair to the army, they also operate within budgets. So, theek hai, wo nahi.
No, but
at least come
given
up,
the
at least
quantities
have
they
a
need.
nutrition. True, you can create economies of
You can
scale.
create,
Absolutely.
exactly. You
Absolutely.
can be the engine of agricultural revolution,
Exactly.
nutritional revolution in
Exactly.
the country.
But वो तो दूर की बात है. आप बस ये सोचो कि nobody in the military is even thinking about, they are thinking about reducing IQ levels. They're not even thinking about why those IQ levels have to be reduced. Nobody wants to check on the fact, was that video actually fake of the fika dal? Nobody wants to talk about the fact that there is no bloody nutrition value left in the officers' mess meal anymore. It's just for tamasha. And it's that typical it's the worst of the British and the worst of the Indians. You know why? Because for the Brits, in those days, spices used to be very expensive. Therefore, or masala dalo, that was a sign of wealth. And here, the more ghee and oil you put, the greater the sign of wealth, so add more.
Also overcooking.
Overcooking.
Just overcooking has destroyed nutritional value. What do you have to say to this culture of supplying cheap liquor to the army? So you're actually encouraging them to get addicted to liquor. And drunkenness is a very serious problem especially with the officers.
Right, but
And that whole, mess culture, you go, you have drinks, you have, act like the Bara Sahibs.
so I think that has, I've never actually seen alcoholism. I've never heard even the whispers of it.
But I
suspect, yeah, exactly.
Because I know many army wives.
Right. And I suspect it's kept under the wraps, which is even more dangerous, because then you can't solve a problem unless you acknowledge there's a problem in the first place. But again, this is taking off from British culture. In the cold weather, you need that one stiff shot of scotch or whiskey or whatever to keep you warm. So for example, in Russia, in winter, wherever you go from conference to, or one office to another office to meet people during the day. You come in through the doors, there's a lady always waiting there with shots of vodka, glug, go in, have your meeting before you go back out into -20, -30, again glug, and then go out. You need it in that weather to keep you warm. In 40 degrees Celsius, if you're telling me you need all of this, the Rajputs, for example, they have a culture of distilling things, but that was for celebrations. It wasn't for battle.
No, but they distilled from fruits.
Exactly.
And grains.
Yeah.
The traditional mahua ki sharab or hadiya.
It was a very different kind.
And,
so for example, when you look at Egyptian beer that was fed to the pyramid builders, it isn't the kind of beer we drink. Today's beer is a entertainment product. The Egyptian pyramid builders' beer was a critical nourishment product. It was a very, very different thing.
See, for the Jawan, what you're giving them is rum or cheap whiskey. And India is the only country in the world which makes even premium whiskey with molasses, the byproduct of the sugar industry, that dirty shira that comes out. Everywhere else, I mean, where they make premium malts and etc., they are from grains or fruits. But in India, most of even whiskey, expensive whiskey, is from molasses, which is actually a filthy, dirty byproduct, nutritious-less byproduct of the sugarcane industry,
And you see here,
and that's what your Jawan is drinking. Yeah. So that also it's better than what he was.
See, here's the problem.
He was at least having mahua in his village.
To see the problem out here, across the board, absolutely no thought given to nutrition, absolutely no thought given to the well-being of your ordinary Jawan and soldier, and they think slogans are a substitute. Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan is not a substitute for looking after your Jawan. Okay, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan is not a substitute for giving your Jawan fika dal. Okay, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan is not throwing things at him which he hasn't been attuned to.
Come to this at greater length, this technological deficit that our army actually suffers from. Right. Because you said it in the early part, but please describe in more detail.
So, when it comes to technology, on one hand, so there's a huge disparity between, say, the Air Force and the Army across the world. Across the world, the Air Force always leads in technology, the Army always follows way behind, right? Because ground warfare is less suited. So, for example, in a planes have had autopilots for a very long time. Ground vehicles, we still haven't, the last autonomously piloted Google vehicle, I think it was, went and crashed into somebody and killed them, right? So, much tougher implementing technology on the ground for a variety of reasons. But when you look at technology just on the application to the infantry soldier, and I'm just talking about the soldier, I'm not talking about the Navy, Air Force and things like that, there are aspects, to the mental programming that happens ever since you're a kid, which we simply don't look after. And it's even shoddier than the attention we pay to nutrition. Let me give you an example. When I was growing up, I was one of the very few people to have a computer at home. First those 286 computers, then a 386 computer, and then 486, and then Pentium and all of that. So, you know, your eye got adjusted to searching for things on the screen to open different windows and jostle between windows. My mom did not go through that phase. She was already an adult when all of this had happened. So even today, when she has to, you know, look at the computer, and I'll say there'll only be 8 icons on the desktop, and I say, Mommy, just click on that, she'll take almost a minute to look around, check the name of every single icon, whereas the moment you tell me, it'll be like, there. It's like almost instantaneous, almost speed of light in that sense, the way you process it. It's the same thing with her for the phone. She takes a while to, you know, she has to keep looking, where is this, and then navigate it and things like that. And I see with a lot of the older generation, that is, very few people have that dexterity to navigate through electronic menus and things like that. I myself faced my mom kind of situation, because by the time, you know, when I was growing up, video games used to be very easy. We had Dig Dug, Pac-Man, Dave, Space Invaders, and Bricks.
I used to think they are for the mentally retarded, or they'll make you retarded.
Well, I mean, maybe.
But you pointed to a totally altogether different dimension of it.
Yeah.
Because what you mentioned before we started talking formally is that the technology in the civilian sector is running far ahead.
So I'll get to
Come to that.
So what happens here is, these were very rudimentary games, right? It was just a question of, you know, moving this thing so that the ball always hit, and you had 3 lives, very little information to process. It was just a pastime. Today, a game has actually become an extremely powerful mental training tool, a video game. Simple example of this is the extent to which PlayStation and Xbox and those Nintendo, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't play them anymore, but I never did. And I'll tell you why. When I had to move to my first multiplayer complex game, which at that time was called Castle Wolfenstein, it was so complex for me. I was feeling like an absolute mentally challenged person dealing with this. I just couldn't deal with it. There were too many things to process, there were too many threats, there was too much information to process and things like that. And in the middle of all of this, you have to fight. You have to kill zombie Nazi soldiers out here. That's actually very similar to a real combat situation.
And kids of today know it.
Western kids play it. I don't know if they know it, but they play it. But learn the kind of mental training that's happening. You are able to process a huge amount of information, focus on what's important, you're able to process it, connect it all up in your brain and use it to effect, which I, of an older generation, am still not. These kids are. And mind you, at one point of time when I was growing up, military computers and military technology were way ahead of civilian technology. Today, because you know, you've had a 3-fold increase in wealth, the civilian market is multiple times bigger than the military market. So it is civilian technology that leads and military technology that comes behind.
I see. Even in the US?
Even in the US, especially in the US. The greater the technology gap, the wealthier the country, the more civilian technology has gone ahead of military technology. Simple example, about 10 years back, they had to ban PlayStation chips from being exported to North Korea and Libya, because PlayStation chips apparently had better image processing abilities than military technology of the time did. And this was 10 years back. That good.
Wow.
Literally that good. Okay. So what you have today is a situation where, you know, games, we think of them as games, they're not. Because remember, in real life, why was it that our parents would always say, don't waste your time on video games, go out and play, do real things? Because team sports taught you certain things. They taught you interpersonal communication, they taught you how to collectively group think like a wolf pack and attack the ball or hockey or whatever and things like that. They taught you hand-eye coordination. Today, that same function and more is carried out by games because it's a far more sophisticated way of processing your mind to deal with massive amounts of information and focus on only what's important. Now, when you have a disposable income of $40,000 per household in the West, they can afford these games. In India, at $2,000 per capita, you can't afford these games. So see, all the technology has moved in the West from kinetic towards information and situational awareness. Right?
Situational awareness.
So here's it for us even today. The thing is, हमारे जवानों ने बहुत शौर्य से जम के हमला किया. You will never hear the Americans saying that. They will say, we conducted reconnaissance, we were very clear that there was nobody around us, and when we know there was nobody around us, then we attacked. See that medieval concept of valor, that you tore open your chest shirt like Dharmendra and the bullets bounced off you kind of thing.
We were proud even when our soldiers on the China border were bludgeoned to death with those steel spikes, and they were not allowed to fire or carry guns.
No, they were allowed to, and they did fire actually.
Later?
No, right at the beginning. The issue was, this wasn't something that probably required them to have gone in. You should have had, micro drones, and these micro drones for individual soldier kind of reconnaissance. Because see, if there's a wall here, I can't see what's behind it, or if there's a rock there. On the other hand, if I've got a small light airplane, which doesn't cost much, a drone transmitting images, I can see where, with thermal sensors at night, you can see where people are around, and then you go in. These have been available for 10, 12, 15 years now.
Are they available for our
No,
soldiers?
they're not. We don't invest in this.
Oh.
So you understand how badly our soldier is treated in this country. And we think everything can be hidden behind patriotism and sloganeering.
But our army does so well.
And therein lies the point. Look at our boys. They are so amazing that they have everything against them. Their own system is against them. Their own chiefs are against them. Right? They all want their Sahayak system. They want dogs for food for their 24 dogs even after they retire and crap like that. They want their this thing about their retirement benefits, that they want one OROP and all of that. We will go on strike and all of that. But the basic things that could have been bought and integrated to protect our soldiers, they will never do.
Also, it destroys the self-esteem of soldiers if they have to work like demeaned servants.
So imagine how patriotic they are.
Clean bathrooms, cook, sweep, drive, take all the shit from their kids.
So imagine how patriotic they are that they do all of this and they still protect us so well.
Would you abolish the orderly system?
It's not just the orderly system.
No, I'm saying would you take a stand? You would, right?
Of course. I think nobody under general level, nobody should be given a driver. Okay? Under general level, there should be absolutely no help provided from the services.
Yeah, certainly not.
You get a salary, you get your own. Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, no drinks orderly, this, that, all of that. Absolutely not. These things need to be cut. They need to be cut viciously. They need to be culled.
Yeah.
But nobody will do it.
Polishing your shoes, helping you wear your underwear.
You polish your own bloody shoes. You wash your own bloody clothes.
Or hire somebody like we do.
I get paid a lot more than generals do. I have no issues putting my own clothes into a washing machine. I don't do a very good job of ironing them. That's a different matter. But
that's your choice.
That's my choice.
You could have a Dhobi do it for you if you want it.
What is this need? What is this pride associated with having manual labor, and that too for a soldier who's meant to fight for his country, making you do all of this?
So is it just patriotism, this attachment to Bharat Mata
that
makes them
and
perform
mind you,
so well?
It is the attachment to Bharat Mata, the immemorial concept of India, not this bullshit idea of India, quote unquote idea of India, that Sunil Khilnani and types have come up with in the last 70 years, which is all to, lay floral tributes at the feet of the Nehru Gandhi family.
India is not an idea for us.
Yeah.
It's Bharat Mata.
For us, it's Bharat Mata.
Bharat Mata,
okay.
yeah. And for the soldier, it's
So if India goes to hell, I don't care. I care about Bharat Mata. For all I care, India bhaand mein jaye.
very well said. Now, final question, and this is the one that worries me the most. I've had recent conversations with senior army officers as well as senior police officers from DG, IG level and in the army really high up. And what I find is that this phony secularism as practiced by the Indian army is, or even the police, is truly frightening. For example, recently I was in the Northeast, and there we know the insurgent movement gets support from the churches, just as it does in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Nakshals too. They have a very intimate relationship. They've been nurtured by them from the very start. The church has nurtured them, which is why it's no coincidence that wherever Christianity has spread its wings, we have seen the red corridor expand and Maoist takeover, insurgency takeover. Similarly, wherever there is a sizable proportion of Muslims, the mosques are providing support to terror groups, to secessionist groups, to break up India forces. But army officers in their training or even while strategizing how to deal with insurgents are not allowed to attack places of worship because Bhagwan ka ghar hai, and with Christian churches they'll say, oh, they do great social work, they are providing education, ghar to Bhagwan ka hai, sabke Bhagwan ek jaise hote hain. Same for mosques. How can you deal with insurgency when these places are no-go regions for them, for the army? When they're not even allowed to discuss it, they feel horrified.
So
If
this
we
is
mention
where
it, they think
our
it's being communal.
the French were so good with their secularism. They have extremely uncomfortable conversations very publicly, and they deal with it in a non-discriminatory way. So you could have, say, if you adopted the French approach in India, you would see that the church supports all these ethno-linguistic separatist movements in the northeast and these Naxal movements in Central India. But the approach to it would be to cut off funding, to limit things which would affect all religions equally, but they do it ruthlessly. In India, we are the great grandfathers of the woke movement. Okay, especially the institutions. Why? Because you impose thought controls and speech controls. Now, you can only have problem solving if there is introspection and learning.
An honest
When you
statement
don't want
of
to
facts.
talk about it, then what do? Even today. So, the classic example is to cover up Nehru's shit. The Henderson Brooks Committee report, nobody has their hands on it.
Yeah. Till date.
Till date. So how are you meant to learn from your failures and mistakes?
True.
Right. With the Kargil committee, some of us have seen the so-called report that was made. That report was a goddamn joke. True. Because all of us knew there were a lot of things happening in the background which clearly the Kargil committee either did not consider or was duplicitous enough to not put in that one secret chapter of its thing, because a lot of us have seen that secret chapter and you've also seen it.
Yeah.
And you know it's shit.
Yep.
It's a full-on cover-up.
Yes.
Yes. Because
Just
we all
as
know what happened.
Vora committee report was never allowed to come out in full.
Exactly.
Which shows criminalization of politics at the highest echelon.
So here's the problem. If you keep suppressing information, the genius, see, democracy has two genius. One is it acts as a pressure valve. जैसे pressure में बहुत ज़्यादा pressure बढ़ता है तो CT आ जाती है. That is your election. The election is the CT. Pressure बहुत ज़्यादा है, so we want a different government or something, so you change it. It prevents social disintegration. The second is it acts as an early warning system. Like, it's that guard post where the guy is sitting so he can see the enemy come from a distance. It's like that. You see, because in a democracy, information should be free-flowing. Opinions should be free-flowing. It doesn't matter if you like it or not, it should be free-flowing. It doesn't matter if it's inconvenient or not, it should be free-flowing. And then you can see कि भाई दुश्मन आ रहा है and solve the problem. Here, you're telling the fellow, भाई तुम इस साइड 45 डिग्रीज देखो, उस साइड 45 डिग्रीज देखो, इस साइड 45 डिग्रीज और उस साइड 45 डिग्रीज मत देखो. What kind of a guard post is that? So democracy in this country functions in one way, which is the pressure outlet, but in terms of the information movement, so that you don't suffer from, tunnel vision, it's failed completely and absolutely.
So, how would you remedy it, especially with regard to security forces? Because everywhere the argument is it will hurt them, it will create within it, because we have
people who make
multi-religious.
the people who make this hurt them argument, they're the people who piss me off most, because they're most probably the most corrupt bastards around. They're the ones who are probably making money off all this shit. Right? So the moment somebody says this is going to hurt them, catch that fellow and throw him in jail.
True, but
Here's the issue. If you're going to go,
must have a church,
if you
gurdwara,
first of
a
all,
mandir, a mosque. That's
see,
okay.
You need to have specific time, motion, work, nutrition experts, education experts, global education experts, not the kind of quacks and crap shit you have in this country, come and look at this from a first principles basis. Okay, so for example, I support women in the Air Force. I do not support women in the Army.
Very well said.
Okay, why? Because in the Air Force, see, the only physical difference between a man and a woman is physical strength.
Yeah.
Now, don't judge me. I've got very small hands, very chubby hands, very soft hands. These are softer than any woman's hands you would have ever met. They're probably even softer than Cleopatra's hands. I get beaten by women all the time. So, don't judge me by it. But I'm saying generally, the only difference between a man and a woman is men are capable of far greater physical strength than women. In a place like the Air Force, which is heavily technology dependent, physical strength has no meaning. It's the ability to process information, act under pressure. It's almost a white collar fighting job in that sense, right? The physical labor and even physiognomically speaking, Air Force doesn't need aerobic fitness, it needs anaerobic fitness. You don't want longer veins, because then there's more surface area and therefore G forces affect you more. You need anaerobic fitness, so shorter, more muscled, where the walls of the ventricles and things like that are thicker, better built, so that they can resist G forces when you're maneuvering and things like that. See, Air Force is uniquely suited to women. Say submarines and things like that would be uniquely suited to women, because again, physical exertion nahi hai udhar. But in the army, and this is an army which at Kargil didn't have mechanical equipment to hoist the Bofors up to heights. They had to physically, 4,000-year-old, a Bofors gun weighs about the same as one of the heaviest pieces of limestone to go on top of the pyramids. It was carried up those Tiger Hill and all those places in the exact same way that pyramid builders carried it up 4,500 years back. That should tell you a lot.
True.
Right? They didn't even want to use things like helicopters with missiles to hit a direct hit. They're still thinking in terms of we have to take the gun up to do a direct hit, because we will not deploy air power. This was one of the geniuses of, we will not allow air power to go across the border. Genius decision of the government at that time. God knows how many lives we lost because of it, but it was sold as being responsible. And then of course you had that complete whitewash, the joke of a Kargil committee report, which I think anybody in their right mind would know it was a pathetic joke.
Also, sexual harassment charges. You see, when you are living in the same bunker, when a fake charge, or an imaginary charge,
absolutely,
or a stress response,
but see, this is
physical contact.
This is not a issue of in the army. Unfortunately, because of the opacity of the army, these are much more prone to abuse. We need to remember that. But at the same time, I think this "we believe her" movement, that a woman cannot lie, is absolute rubbish. Because on one hand, you claim women are equal to men, which is capable of just as much conniving, manipulation, lying, cheating, fraud as a man is. On the other hand, you want us to believe that she is somehow Sati Savitri, Virgin Mary or whatever, but see, this also shows you how little we think about jurisprudence in this country. where the burden of proof
Is
is
on the
completely
accused.
reversed when it comes here. And how do you prove you're innocent?
True.
You know, it's a ridiculous thing.
No, especially at the border, in those heights, you're in bunkers, that close proximity, any contact, touch can be easily misrepresented.
Which is why, you know, unpopular opinion, but the Air Force and the Navy are optimally suited to women, even in ships today, because modern ships, if you look at the accommodations and things, it's no longer like it used to be. You know, once upon a time, a ship, a frigate, a 3,000 ton ship needed to have about 400 soldiers to man it, 400 sailors to man it. A submarine needed to have about 80-90 people. Today submarines operate with, you know, 20 people. A ship of 3,000 tons will operate with about 70 people. So each person can have their own bunker, they can have their personal space. That issue doesn't come into play anymore. In the army it does, because of the isolation, because of the closed quarters, and things like that. So, but look, if you say this, the entire feminist lobby comes down on your head saying, oh my God, how dare he say this?
But we have to dare, because when you're dealing
Why?
with...
Because, and then they point saying Israel has done this, France has done this, America has done this. Boss, do you know how far down the line they are in terms of, you know, removing human energy and switching to mechanical energy and
exactly
this thing? So, which is why it wasn't all the suffragettes and, you know, who won women the right. It was industrialization that won women the right. Because the moment you removed physical energy as the determinant of power and wealth, and it became chemical energy, so a woman can pull a lever just as well as a man can pull a lever. That is when the basis of equality is laid. So isn't it amazing? It is patriarchy which gives birth to the Industrial Revolution, which then gives birth to feminism and to liberation. It isn't feminism that actually leads to the emancipation of women. It's actually products of the
but you
patriarchy.
see, in traditional, at least in the Indic civilization, this is the last one, we had more than equality. When you are given sanskars about the feminine being the divine force that rules the entire universe, every female is seen as an incarnation of the same divine, that entire Vedantic philosophy. I think it was far better than equality. I'd rather go by that. But that mechanical equality, which is 50% in everything, is ridiculous.
Exactly. It can't be enforced equality.
Yeah.
Just like an enforced caste system is bad. You know, if you want to get into say garbage collection and you think you have a brilliant idea for it, you should be free to do that. Nobody should judge you for it. But to say the son of a garbage collector will only be a garbage collector and I will not let you into my house and things like that, that is bad. So enforced anything is bad. So these artificial, you know, there must be this diversity quota, this quota, that quota.
I mean, we had a Rani Lakshmi Bai, but
We've had Kitu Rani Chennamma,
exactly,
we've had
so many.
a lot of people.
Exactly.
The Travancore Royal House, where the women held all the power,
Yeah.
and very frequently used to send off their paramours to be sacrificed off to Kali. If they got too big for their boots, the men were sent off to be sacrificed to Kali. You know, so it was good fun that way. It was the reverse of the 1001 Nights. So all of that is fine, but you know, the main thing we need to look at here is.
Yeah.
Nothing can be enforced. We need to understand that the basic anthropological roots of India, we're at a much earlier stage of development. We're a pre-industrial society. We are not an industrial society.
No. We are a colonized and our industrial.
That's a mindset. Story. I'm not talking about mindset. I'm talking about the
I'm
stage
saying
of
our
development.
Industries were destroyed.
No, we never had industry. No, I need to correct that. We never had industry.
Chalo,
industry is the application of chemical energy to the production process.
That's
we had
another
scale.
Day.
We did not have industry. So different notions of industrialization. But yes, that's for a different day.
That's for a different. So concluding, for the army, what's your message? How do we go into the emergency mode? What would your message be for the political establishment?
Get your shit together, because right now you're doing a damn poor job and slogans are only going to go so far.
And free them from the stranglehold of the bureaucracy?
No, This isn't a bureaucratic problem. This is a pure military high command problem. You know, every time they get this, they hide behind slogans, they hide behind patriotism. You know, they say patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. In India, patriotism, the IAS babus and slogans are the first refuge
resort
of the military scoundrels.
Okay. With these, we conclude this conversation here tonight. See you soon with another episode. Thank you.